It's on? All right. Connor, we're good? All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. If we can ask everyone to gather, thank you for being here at Cedar Crest College for Senator Bob Casey's town hall meeting here in the Lehigh Valley. Welcome to this drive-in town hall format. My name is Don Cunningham. I'm President and CEO of the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation, which is the coalition in the Lehigh Valley of private businesses and governments working together with our governmental leaders on economic strategy, marketing, and job creation here in the Lehigh Valley. It's my honor to be able to serve today as the monitor for Senator Casey's drive-in town hall meeting. This is one of our cornerstone events in our democracy in America for our representatives to meet with their constituents. And we are grateful, Senator, that you are doing this here in the Lehigh Valley. And before I welcome Senator Casey to the stage, I want to lay out some ground rules for today's 60-minute event. A few housekeeping items that this town hall meeting obviously is taking place outside. We are asking attendees to please remain in or at your vehicles. If you have not already done so, and if you are at your car, you can tune in to FM 88.3 to hear the live audio if you're having any challenges hearing the audio in your cars. FM 88.3. Senator Casey and I did have our masks on. We've removed them because we will remain 6 feet apart. Staff and attendees are also encouraged to maintain 6 feet of distance from each other at all times, even though we are outdoors. Therefore, we will be at lower risk of any kind of airborne transmission. The senator wants to get as many constituent questions as possible today, and to do so, we need to all be on the same page as to how this will work. Senator Casey will begin today's event with some opening remarks with his outlook on the political climate in Washington, the work he is doing for all the people here in attendance and across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and some of the issues and topics that he is paying close attention to. Following that, we will begin taking questions from the audience and a few from folks who are watching from home on the live stream. Today is meant to be informative and to allow constituents to be heard firsthand by their senator. Please not only respect the senator when talking, but the people around you. Limit any shouting, use of profanities, or any unruly behavior. I know Senator Casey will grant you the respect, so please do your best to return that favor. Finally, as you can see at the front of the stage, this event is open to the media. By entering this event, as you saw on the signs on the entry, that your questions, names, and images have been consented to being used by the news outlets here. So meaning, if you are going to be asking questions, you are giving consent to be recorded and to be quoted by the news media that are present. If this is not your wish, now would be the time to make your way out of the open space. With that said, it is my great honor to introduce and bring to the front a great friend of mine, somebody I've had the honor and pleasure to work with a long time in different roles in government, and somebody who has always been here for us and there in Washington and here in the Lehigh Valley for the people, the businesses, and the communities of the Lehigh Valley. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Bob Casey. Senator.
I wanted to dramatically take the mask off because this is a Pennsylvania mask. It was made during the pandemic, but I don't know if there's a Lehigh Valley reference on here, so I better put it in my pocket. There's something about the Liberty Bell there, and I see Valley Forge and Punxsutawney Phil. I'll have to get a new version. But Don, thanks so much for being here and for acting as our MC. This is our 7th town hall, or I should say drive-in town hall, since the spring. and we'll be doing at least one more next month. But we wanted to do these town halls to be able to come out and talk about the work we're doing in Washington. I know that's not the only work that's being done in government and in communities like Allentown and the Lehigh Valley, but we're grateful for the opportunity. We're grateful that people are willing to come out, and every gathering like this needs an MC, a moderator, someone who can help us, and Don, we're grateful for that. Don, as you might remember, had a distinguished career of public service to the people of this region, both in the city of Bethlehem as a member of city council, as mayor, as county executive, and now leading one of the most dynamic, successful economic development organizations in the whole country. Preparing this region and the companies in this region and the workers in this region for a bright future. So we're grateful he's willing to spend some of his summer with us on an evening like tonight. So I want to thank him for that and for his leadership. I wanted to make a couple, go ahead, give Don a hand. And I see over here on my left Dr. Mead, the president of Cedar Crest, and we're grateful to be here on this campus, this great institution. We're just talking backstage about the graduates who spend their time here as undergraduates and then go on to serve this community and so many other communities. We spoke about a number of different disciplines and areas of study, but we were talking towards the end of our conversation about nurses and the nursing students that come through this great institution of higher education. I know we have always appreciated the mission and ministry of a nurse, but probably ever more so in the grip of and the aftermath, what we hope will soon be the aftermath of the pandemic, because of all they contributed. All of the public health and healthcare professionals who helped us get through this long, dark chapter. I know we got a ways to go. It's one of the reasons this event is a drive-in event and not the event that we had hoped for a month or a month and a half ago. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. Just wanted to highlight some of the areas we're working on in terms of policy in Washington. I'm holding in my hand just copies of some handouts that I think many of you might have tonight. One is this. It just says an Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That's the bill that you heard so much about. I won't go through all of it. I won't even highlight all the Pennsylvania numbers in it. But it's significant because it is the kind of investment in physical infrastructure that our country has never undertaken before. And when I say never, I mean never. To give you a sense of what it's going to mean for the people of Pennsylvania. At last count in our state, if you look at it statewide, but even if you're just focused on Lehigh County, the Lehigh Valley, this region overall, just consider one category, bridges. At last count, the state of Pennsylvania had 3,353 bridges that are in poor condition. Now, poor condition doesn't mean that bridge is going to collapse next Wednesday. We hope to God it won't. But it means over time you're going to be putting communities at risk and economic growth at risk if you don't fix basic infrastructure like a bridge, among many others covered by the bill. This legislation, just for Pennsylvania, will add to what the state is already doing over the last decade, or almost a decade, on bridge repair and replacement, add another $1.6 billion. And there's other bridge money the state can apply for, but we know that it'll be guaranteed that 1.6. I could talk about the highway money and the transit money, the broadband investment. Still so many communities throughout the state, even here in the Lehigh Valley, where it is a little more urban maybe than the middle of the state or northwestern Pennsylvania, but a lot of communities still don't have broadband. Kids can't do their homework. Businesses can't grow if they don't have access to high-speed internet. So this infrastructure bill, which kind of went by people pretty quickly, will make a tremendous investment in our home state of Pennsylvania. Last point I'll make about this is another piece of paper you have here. This just says at the top how Pennsylvania benefits from the so-called Better Care, Better Jobs bill. Just happens to be my bill, so I'm bragging about it a little bit. But this bill is simple in its concept, but profound in its impact on the lives of Pennsylvanians. We're talking about, and this is legislation we're about to work on in September, to finally make investments that will allow seniors to get home care who can't get it now because they haven't been given a waiver under federal law, and people with disabilities to get home care or care in the community. It goes by the broad headline Home and Community-Based Services, by the acronym HCBS. Those home and community-based services are vital for Americans. It's the choice they want to make in terms of the care they hope to receive. They should not have only one choice, which is institutional care or congregate care, or often to shorthand it as nursing home care. They should have that option as Americans to get the care they want in the place that they want, and so that they and their families can have that kind of benefit. The workforce that does this noble, heroic, and essential work should be paid more. They're only paid $12 an hour throughout the nation. We cannot say that we're the strongest country in the world, the best country in the world, when we're not investing enough in home and services. So this handout tells us about the impact on Pennsylvania jobs and the services that will be provided. Lots of jobs to be created, lots of family caregivers to work because they have someone who's helping them care for a loved one, whether that loved one is a senior citizen or whether that loved one is a child with a disability who needs help, or whether it's an adult with a disability. So we might be talking more about that tonight. Finally, I want to say this. One of the best things we did in the last couple of months in Washington, frankly, one of the best things we did in years, was to come together to make investments through the rescue plan for schools, for vaccination. We need that money now more than ever to get the vaccination number up, and also to invest in people, to invest in tax cuts for families raising children, for example. But in addition to that, we made investments as well in communities. And just think about it this way, in Lehigh County alone, $152 million available through county government to help the entire county, and then when you add the dollars for other communities, it's over $150 million, as I mentioned. Northampton County was a little less because it's a smaller population county, but they got $139 million. You should have the resources at the local level, not just to deal with the pandemic and to deal with all of the challenges that come with it, but you should also have the resources to be able to save small businesses, as some county governments are using their resources to do just that. So we got a lot more to do, a lot more work to do, and I know a lot of families are still suffering, but we're going to do everything we can to try to meet those challenges in the next 2 months, especially as we work on new legislation. But we'll get to those issues and others tonight, so let's take our first question.
Thank you, Senator.
Do you mind saying your name, only because sometimes with the
Yeah.
mask, I may know some.
I live in Kutztown, and this is my question. How will the Senate protect and expand voting rights and prevent racial and partisan gerrymandering in the current redistricting?
It's a great question, because we're confronted with a challenge the likes of which I'm not sure any of us would have thought would be right ahead of us just a few years ago. There are efforts made now in state after state, some 400 bills now, to change voting. So I believe as a member of the United States Senate, I've got to do two things: to do everything I can to stop those bills from becoming law or having the effect that I think they will have on voting in America all across the country. But secondly, and probably more importantly in terms of what I can do, is to vote the right way. We have at least one or two big opportunities coming up. I'd say two. The first one may be more difficult. The second one I think we can actually make more progress on. The first is Senate Bill 1. It's called For the People. It deals with some of these voting issues directly to prevent some of the voter suppression that's contained in those state legislative efforts across so many states, those 400 bills. But it also has provisions in it to deal with so-called dark money, the corporate influence that has been brought to bear through elections, through dark money, where you don't know where the money's coming from when you're seeing attack ads launched against a candidate or on an issue. So it'll bring scrutiny and transparency to those expenditures. And the third part of the bill is about ethics. Stronger ethics for members of Congress, stronger ethics for the President of the United States, and a stronger code of ethics and rules and requirements for Supreme Court justices. I think probably the more likely scenario is the voting rights elements of that bill and other voting rights provisions will be contained in a separate bill, which we can vote on this fall. We already had one vote on it, actually another vote just before we left last week. But we now know that we have 50 Democrats, meaning every Democrat in the Senate, willing to support a voting rights bill. That's already been tested. We can't get the support of the other side yet. I hope when they're home for the next couple weeks, they might think again about protecting voting rights. Nothing is more fundamental, nothing is more foundational for our democracy than making sure that people have not just the right to vote and that vote is protected, but that they should have the option to vote in the way that's best for them. If that means they vote on Election Day, fine. If that means they vote by mail early, that's fine. We saw what happened last time when we had the worst pandemic in American history and a tough economy. We still got the highest turnout ever for a presidential race because there were more options to vote in place, like in a state like Pennsylvania, because we were ready for the pandemic. So we got to make sure that people not only have the right to vote, but to be able to vote in the setting and in the manner that they would choose. But thanks for the question.
Becky Bradley, our Executive Director of the Lehigh Planning Commission.
How are
Lehigh
you?
Valley Planning Commission.
Good. It's good to see you, and thank you for being in the Lehigh Valley. First, I wanted to thank you for your leadership on the recent infrastructure and also the climate bills. Both are groundbreaking, and it's apparent that these pieces of legislation really don't function in isolation. They actually work together and reinforce and grow our economy, help improve our national security, and support a resilient future. Your appearance today is just a few miles away from Riverside Drive, the Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor and 9/11 Memorial Trail project. In addition to a commuter connector, walking, rolling, biking path, the project will open new emergency services routes, support Lanta's bus rapid transit line, create thousands of jobs, and connect the region's largest equity community to employment centers while remediating brownfields and protecting the Lehigh River. So it demonstrates all of those key objectives that are in the bills that you've helped move through and are moving through the Senate. We've applied as a Lehigh Valley for the last 5 years for discretionary funding from USDOT. Every year that money goes to Philly and Pittsburgh. Would you help us bring it back here?
Well, is your first name Bradley?
Becky.
Becky, I'm sorry. Well, Becky, I know you were the questioner, but did you get any nudge from Don Cunningham to ask that question?
Nope, I did not know she was.
I'm only-
But
No,
we're
we're-
supporting it.
No, we'll try to be as helpful as we can. I don't know enough about it, that project and the particulars of it, but I'll make sure that we spend some time on it. Because these are the kind of projects and the kind of investments that we can make not only for one community and not only for one objective, which is to improve the quality of life, to bring about more equity, to one of the outgrowths of the now national, international effort to confront climate change and protect God's creation, our planet. One of the outgrowths of that has been a recognition that there are communities that have been left out. Environmental justice is one of the ways to describe what's happened, where so many communities, usually low-income communities and often communities that are both low-income and communities of color, have not had the kind of investment to keep their air clean, to keep the water and the the infrastructure in their communities at a level that any of us would expect as Americans. And too often, whether it's been lead in water or lead in houses or pollution or lack of transportation options or so many other challenges, I think the challenge presented by climate change has caused us to focus on the inequities in so many of those communities. So I'd like to spend more time with your team, get ways that we can be helpful.
Thank you.
And Connor, see right behind you, Connor works in this region, and Connor can work with you.
And Senator, this is Josh Siegel, who's a member of Allentown City Council.
Just said hello earlier.
Yeah. Josh?
Yeah. Like Becky Bradley, I do want to thank you for coming back to the Lehigh Valley, and as always, it's a pleasure to have you here in the city of Allentown. My question relates to, and I want to thank you first, obviously, for your steadfast leadership, both on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but more importantly, the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill that's making its way through both the Senate and the House. Obviously, the reconciliation bill emphasizes not just the physical infrastructure, but more importantly, as we spoke about, sort of the human infrastructure that we've neglected in this country for so long. And my question pertains to healthcare, which I think the COVID epidemic has laid bare as perhaps the most vital human infrastructure that we could possibly invest in. I want to know what you will do in the United States Senate to either fight to lower the age of Medicare eligibility so that more people can get access to quality, affordable health insurance, make Medicare more accessible, perhaps even to public employees. In the city of Allentown, I can say, as a municipal official, our fastest growing expense by and large is healthcare, which absorbs vital public services that could otherwise be invested back into the community in terms of housing, social welfare, education. And beyond that, will you support a gradual transition or an overall transition to a Medicare for all single-payer healthcare system so that every American in this country can get access to the most vital human right and human infrastructure, which is healthcare?
Well, Councilman, I want to thank you for, first of all, your service. I don't have to say to Don Cunningham how brave you have to be to serve on any city council, right? But we're grateful for the question, because in this next initiative, as you outlined, there are going to be major component parts of this bill that focus on areas that we used to think was significant and substantial just for one piece of legislation, let alone a piece of legislation that won't focus on health care, a huge investment to meet the climate change challenge. I mentioned home and community-based services, pre-kindergarten education, quality, affordable child care. It's basically a strategy to lower costs for families and to help families get to work and to be able to grow, and obviously as well to create a lot of jobs as we're confronting the challenge of climate change. On the healthcare front itself, if you just pulled out the segments of this proposal, and it's still, we have some broad definitions from the budget resolution, but now we're into the second part where you're actually writing the policy and focusing on revenues and pay-fors. Because unlike the 2017 tax bill, when the other side had the majority, they didn't pay for that bill. We're going to try to pay for as much as this legislation as possible. So if you just pull out the healthcare provisions for examination, or talk about the issue more generally, one of the newer features of this, which actually was not in President Biden's original proposal, the so-called Families Plan, way back in April when he announced the Families Plan, there's a new proposal led by Senator Sanders. Actually, I had the original bill on this, which was to expand Medicare in terms of hearing, dental, and vision. We've never had those services and those provisions covered. Now we can, if we can get this major piece of legislation passed. So that would be a substantial expansion of the benefits under Medicare. Secondly, we also have an opportunity to continue some of the improvements to health care that were made in the rescue plan. The benefits in the rescue plan to those who were served by Affordable Care Act exchanges and had benefit from the Affordable Care Act, the changes in the rescue plan were substantial, but it didn't get a lot of attention because people were focused on the rescue plan had $1,400 checks and a couple of other provisions. which got a lot of attention. So I think we can build upon and grow the advancements we made in the rescue plan. I also think that when you made reference to Medicare, allowing people to enroll in Medicare at a younger age or to buy into Medicare at a younger age, I've always supported a proposal that's been around for a number of years for Medicare at 50. I'm not certain that will be in this bill, but that's certainly been part of the debate. And in terms of what we do for health care overall, the one, I'd say two big questions I have when folks say, what about Medicare for all? I have two big questions, at least, maybe more, but at least two big ones. What happens to the Children's Health Insurance Program, and what happens to the Medicaid program? Both are vital in terms of children's health insurance, and I haven't gotten the answers to those questions that are satisfactory to me, but they're vitally important. Now, I think when we talk about expanding health care, what probably won't be in this bill, but I'd like to see enacted into law someday, is to make it very clear that even though we've made great progress on children's health insurance with the Children's Health Insurance Program, with Medicaid for some children and other ways to get health care, we still have not reduced to zero the number of children who are not covered by health care. We still have health insurance. We still have 4 million American children who have no health care at all. And I think that's a national embarrassment. And it's hurting our national security, it's hurting our economic security, and it's hurting the skill of our workforce ultimately. Like a lot of children's issues have an impact. I believe that any child born in a hospital in the United States of America should automatically be enrolled in Medicaid. If the parent or caregiver wants to opt out, fine, they can opt out. But why don't we just make it clear that as soon as a child is born, they are covered by health care, so they can get early periodic screening and diagnostic testing services, so they can get well child visits, so they can get the early care that they need to grow and develop. So that's something we probably won't get to in this bill, but it's another way I think we can expand existing programs. One of the more successful things we ever did recently was expand Medicaid. It helped us grow the number of people with coverage, and it also helped us directly with the opioid crisis. We've got tens of thousands, at one point 70,000 Pennsylvanians getting treatment for a substance use disorder problem like the opioid addiction problem. They only got those services because they had Medicaid expansion, one of the best things we ever did. But thanks, Councilman, for your laser focus on health care.
Well, thank you. And we have our next question. If you could just please give us your name and where you live.
Sure. I'm Carmen Bell here, resident City of Allentown. I wanted to thank the Senator for all he's done to support and strengthen our community, for all he's done to help our older adults. But today my question is focused on younger people. I'm concerned about COVID-19 and the Delta variant and the fact that children under the age of 12 are not yet able to be vaccinated. School is about to start in about 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm wondering when that vaccination is going to be available for children under the age of 12.
Well, Carmen, thanks. And the worry you have about children under the age of 12 is a worry that so many Americans share. I cannot tell you when that will happen because I don't run the FDA. And we want to make sure that the FDA continues to have a process which is thorough and rigorous, so that we can achieve both safety and effectiveness, or efficacy, as they sometimes use the word. That's what the FDA does well. When we had the emergency use authorization determination made by the FDA on various vaccines, that's the highest level of scrutiny and review in the world. There's no standard higher than that. Now we're hoping that the ultimate authorization comes from the FDA that goes beyond emergency use authorization, but that's a pretty high bar to get to. That's why we have over 160 million Americans that are vaccinated. They have to make a separate determination as it relates to children under the age of 12. It may be that they go below 12 but stop stops short in the early years of a child's life. I don't know where that line will be, but we'll have to see what the FDA does. But it's really up to them. Now we in the Senate and the House we provide oversight of the FDA, but we obviously can't interfere with their process. So I'm hoping it's going to be much sooner rather than later on both fronts, both the full authorization for the vaccines that are out there, but also finally have a determination made as it relates to young children. But I think the best thing we can do, I think, in those contexts is to do everything we can to take the steps necessary to keep children safe in schools, and I know a lot of school districts are wrestling with that right now. Thanks, Carmen.
Thank you. Next question.
Good afternoon, Senator. Justin Parker Fields. Just want to thank you and your team for putting Pennsylvanians first and all the hard work that you guys are doing. This pandemic has had crippling effects for working families and individuals who are having a hard time deciding if they're going to put their dollars towards a bill, rent, or food on the table. Eviction moratoriums have become the figurative boogeyman in the headlines as of recent, which turns into a mad scramble for trying to find assistance. What is the game plan for working families and individuals, but also importantly, marginalized communities such as the BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and unsheltered ones to ensure that they get the needed assistance to pay their rent and maintain jobs that will pay them a fair wage to remain in their homes?
Justin, thanks so much. Your question raises a lot of issues all in one. I think what we should try to do, at least this is my view of what we should do going forward in terms of what the federal government can do by way of the legislative and executive branches, is to try to continue a lot of the strategies that were put in place to a certain extent as far back as the CARES Act. That was passed in late March of 2020, and then there were succeeding bills throughout the course of the year which added to the CARES Act. Then ultimately you had a December COVID bill, and then we got into 2021 and we had to do the rescue plan on our own with Democrats. But what you see with a lot of those provisions of those bills is to try to meet people where they are, to try to ask yourself or really engage with people, what do you need to get through? What do you need to pay your bills? What do you need to go forward? So now we're coming towards the end of another chapter where you may not have the same supports in place that you had during the 2020 and early 21 period, but you want to maintain the kind of support that allows families to make ends meet. You mentioned families that have trouble just paying the bills, right? That's why the child tax credit extension is so critically important for families, because a lot of families now are able to benefit. They did in the month of July, they benefited in August and throughout the rest of the year with those child tax credit payments. Other families will start to benefit as well in the spring. This hasn't kicked in yet, with the extensions of the child independent care tax credit for child care costs. They're, in essence, tax cuts for low-income working families and middle-income families. So I think some of those supports should continue. I think one of the areas of policy where, frankly, we didn't do enough of in 2020, try as we might, I was one of the people trying month after month. We couldn't get the votes for more food assistance. Then we finally got support in December of 2020, and then even more so, much more so, in the rescue bill. But there are going to be some communities where a tax credit or food assistance or other ways of direct support may not be enough help. We have to be responsive to the needs of those particular communities. You mentioned the LGBTQ+ community. That's a community where the rate of contracting the virus is even higher sometimes, because often folks in that community were on the front line. They were working in circumstances where they had more exposure to the virus. They, as a community of Americans, I think deserve our attention and our focus when it comes to strategies to be responsive to the virus, but also, or to be responsive to the pandemic, but also to figure out ways to be supportive moving forward. But that's why I think we've all begun to examine healthcare policy, tax policy, and so many areas of federal law through a different lens than we did before the pandemic. We realized, if anything, in the grip of this pandemic, how inequitable our system can be, how the system can be rigged against a lot of Americans. I've said for a long time, and I know I offend some Americans when I say this, but we've had a tax code that's been rigged for 40 years, in my judgment, against the middle class and lower income working people, to the benefit of very, very wealthy Americans and huge multinational corporations. And that just didn't happen 40 years ago. It happened again in 2017 with the tax bill, which I voted against, and I would have voted against 100 more times, because it was more rigging of the tax code for the most powerful people in our society who can hire the lobbyists to ram through a bill like that. Well, what I'm aiming to do in this next bill is to turn a lot of that on its head, to say we're finally going to invest in people who are struggling every day and need the federal government to stand up for them. But I know we'll get a lot of howling from some in Washington, but I know the way I'm going to vote.
Thank you. Next question.
Good evening, Senator. I'm Diane Irish. I'm proud to be a social worker living and working in Lehigh County. I've tried very hard for over 26 years now to help children and their families through a variety of difficult circumstances. And my question isn't unrelated to the last one, but as I'm sure you're very well aware, the minimum wage has been stagnant at $7.25 since 2009. And there is absolutely nowhere in this nation where someone working 40 hours a week at $7.25 an hour can afford a place to live. So my question for you is, would you please tell us what you will be doing, what specific actions you will be taking to raise the minimum wage to a living wage where people can afford a place to live?
It's a great question. Did you say your first name is Diane? Diane, thanks, and thanks for doing the work that you do. That's not easy, and I admire what you do. We had a moment in March of 2021 where we just beginning work to pass the first segment, I should say, of the rescue plan. We had to go through two procedures. One was the budget resolution, which is exactly what we did last week on the upcoming bill, and then we had time in between that time and when we voted on the reconciliation bill. But as we got started in that process, the first amendment that was offered for a vote was a vote on the minimum wage. The Senate, because of the way the Senate has so many strange and often difficult, arcane rules, one of the hurdles to getting that bill voted on as part of that budget resolution process or reconciliation process ultimately was to we had to wait a determination by the Senate parliamentarian. The Senate parliamentarian said you can't vote on that in this bill, that in order to get the minimum wage bill over the goal line, to get enough votes for it, it had to be subjected to the Senate 60-vote rule. Some people call it the filibuster rule, but nobody knows the definition of filibuster, so I call it the 60-vote rule. It would have been easier, obviously, to pass a minimum wage increase with 51 instead of 60, but we couldn't do it. So that's the dilemma we face. The proposal that I supported was to raise the minimum wage from where it is now. It literally has not gone up at the federal level since 2009. We voted in 2007 to raise it. It didn't go into effect until 2009, but it hasn't changed since then. So all these years later, all of the cost increases later, in the life of a family, it hasn't increased. We're trying to get it to $15 an hour over the course of just 5 years. But in order to do that, you've got to pass a bill and you have to get 60 votes. So unless we can get a handful of Republican votes to support that bill, there's not going to be an increase in the minimum wage. And that's the reality right now. Now, the other pathway, and the only other pathway, is if the rules of the Senate were to change so that it's not 60 votes, it's just 51 votes, and that would apply to increasing the minimum wage, that would apply to voting rights, as we mentioned in our first question. That would apply as well to so many other areas of policy that don't fit under the budget umbrella that you can do with just 51 votes. So that's the complexity of it, but that's also the reality of it. We either have to get 60 votes now or change the 60-vote rule to make it 51. And I think it's vital that we get that wage up and do it in the fashion the bill outlines over the course of 5 years. Last thing I'll say is one of the best ways to improve the life of a child now and certainly years and decades from now is to raise the minimum wage for the parent or caregiver who's taking care of that child. All the evidence shows that, so it's a kid's issue as much as it's a worker issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Casey, for coming here. My name is Kathleen Parsons. I live in Coopersburg, Pennsylvania, and I am a school board director for Southern Lehigh School District. I really want to thank you for passing the CARES Act, because that money allowed us to have enrichment classes for the students during the summer and hire more teachers so we can have smaller classes now. It makes a big difference, and that's in a district like mine, so I know that it helped other districts as well. My question is nothing about that.
Well, thanks for serving on the school board. Talk about brave. I think you have to be even braver than you do to be a member of city council. Or any
Just for now. Hopefully we'll get back to normal times. My question is, how do you think we can change campaign finance laws?
Well, there are a lot of ways to do it, but again, this is in that same category. We need 60 votes to do that now. One of the areas I think of policy that probably a lot of people missed was, and this is just my view. I've run in a lot of elections in federal and state, and in the federal elections, try as we might, and I say we, I mean our country, our government, the Congress over time, to have a positive impact on campaign finance by limiting the amount of money one individual can give to a federal candidate. That was supposed to take care of a lot of these problems. It didn't over time, but that was one attempt years ago to limit the amount you can give in a federal race. State races you can give, one person could give $10 million if they wanted to. But under federal law, as bad as that system was before 2010, before the Supreme Court took up a case, it got a lot worse after that case, so-called Citizens United. That just kind of blew the roof off of those limits. So now you had, under American law, the opportunity for one individual to give unlimited amounts of money into a campaign dynamic. They could be promoting one candidate or attacking another or both, and you can find out very little about that person. So that's why they call it dark money. I'd like to use even stronger language. It's gross, it's obscene, and it's terribly, terribly destructive of our system. So as bad as our campaign finance system was at the federal level before Citizens United, it got exponentially worse since then. And it's one of the reasons why we have some of the divisions we have in our country. Not the only reason, but that's one reason, because of campaign finance. The only way to deal with that, because some would challenge it and become a Supreme Court free speech issue, which I think, frankly, is a joke under the way the Supreme Court has dealt with it, but that's just my view. One of the ways to deal with it is to pass legislation like, as I mentioned, as part of that For the People Act, where you would apply a measure of scrutiny on those donors that there is not today. I mean, look, I'm all for someone coming into we figuratively talk about the public square. I'm all for the great American way. You get to come to the public square and you get to have your say. So if you're an oil billionaire and you want to come to the public square and say, I'm for this candidate or I'm for this issue or whatever you want to say, that's fine. But we cannot have a system where that billionaire comes to the public square and has the biggest megaphone and can outshout anyone. He can outshout 1,000 people because he has so much money. And he has a big cloak over him. You can't see who he is. You can't find out who he is. That's what our system is today. You need to hire, you would need to hire a private investigator to find out sometimes who's funding these campaigns. Because sometimes they fund one organization and it gets laundered through that organization to another and to another. Before you know it, nobody knows where the money originated. And it's really destructive. So as frustrated as I am to have that part severed and have a separate voting rights initiative that might be voted on its own, I think we almost have to do that because of how important voting rights is. But we cannot leave on the side of the road these efforts to bring scrutiny and sunlight and transparency to these big money in politics. It's bad enough before 2010. It got a lot worse since then. But thanks for raising it. And I was being very careful there not to use bad language because it gets me.
Those were in the ground rules too.
Yeah, and I'm trying to follow the Cunningham rules here.
All right.
Hello, Senator
How are you?
Casey. I am well. I wanted to extend in my gratitude for your leadership and your thoughtful responses to some very difficult topics. So you had earlier alluded to environmental justice, or more specifically
Right.
inequities in our communities. And so what I'd like you to elaborate on more is, what does Congress need to advance environmental justice? Specifically, how do we make sure President Biden's Justice 40 commitments are met and ensure at least 40% of environmental benefits head directly into low-income communities and to communities of color?
What is your first name?
Maria Ocasio. I'm a field
Maria.
coordinator in the Lehigh Valley for Penn Future CVP.
Oh,
I'm an
great.
Allentonian, first and foremost.
Great. Well, thanks for doing that work. Penn Future does great work. I probably won't be able to give you a full answer, but I'll try my best to try to hit some of the high points. As I said before, sometimes a crisis can reveal both inequities and also present some opportunities. The crisis of COVID-19 forced all of us to look at some issues in a different way and to consider not only points of view, but perspectives we might not have considered before in healthcare and in so many other areas of policy. I think the same is true of climate change, because climate change is such an existential threat to all of us. It is definitively a threat to human life itself, not just that we're going to have a lot of communities destroyed if we don't confront it, but human life will be at risk if we don't deal with it. But it also has caused us to focus on some of these issues that we probably weren't thinking of at all, or not paying enough attention to. And one of the challenges we have with climate change is not simply putting in tax incentives, tax strategies, and other efforts to get more people to be in the future driving electric vehicles. And by the way, that will come about because of largely because of a bipartisan effort in this recent bill. So it's not just Democrats saying this, Republicans are saying it too. Electric vehicle charging stations, having that network set up so that if you're going to buy an electric vehicle, you have a place to charge it. You got to set up that huge, and I'll use the word again, infrastructure. Obviously, we have to get to the goals we want to lower emissions. But there's so many elements to the strategy that you have to consider every possible pathway to get to a lower carbon economy, lowering emissions. And one of the ways that we can begin to tackle that or be part of the overall strategy is conservation. We have a great history in our state of conservation. It goes back hundreds of years. 50 years ago, we put a conservation amendment in the state constitution. Article 1, Section 27. Here's what it says. The people have a right to clean air, pure water, and to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. And then the amendment goes on to talk about each one of us as citizens of the whole state being trustees of the public natural resources of the state. So it's not like a suggestion or a try to do a good job kind of amendment. It is a directive on all of us, and especially those of us who hold elected office, federal, state, or otherwise. So conservation is important to our state constitutionally, mandated, but it's also an important part of climate change mitigation and the confrontation we have to have with these climate issues. What I want to do in this, as part of this larger effort on climate in the next bill we're talking about, is to make sure that we have a resuscitation of or a new version of the old 1930s Civilian Conservation Corps. We should be creating jobs through federal government funding, and yes, I'm saying that, federal government dollars, but have it locally directed and designed so you can decide here in a particular community, whether it's Allentown or even a much smaller community, what are the conservation initiatives you want to undertake, and how will that be designed, and how will you hire people? Who will be the sponsor? Will it be a conservation district or organization? Will it be Penn Future? Will it be a single farmer who could do this? Lots of options under my bill, so that we're using conservation as yet another way to bring to bear not just solutions on climate, but bring a measure of environmental justice to communities that have been ravaged for far too long. As I said before, lower income communities and communities that are both lower income and communities of color tend to have some of the worst environmental degradations heaped on them year after year and generation after generation. A Civilian Conservation Corps is one of the ways to tackle that, to actually send workers in to focus on that community. Now, it also involves equity when it comes to issues like health care and getting wages up and so many other strategies. It's not just conservation and climate mitigation. But I think we can get there by bringing kind of a whole of, not just whole of government, but really whole of society approach to tackling climate change, and environmental justice has to be part of that.
And Senator, I believe we have just two questions. Come on up. We have two questions remaining. We have about 5 minutes, so we should be able to get them both in if we move along. Thank you.
Good evening, Senator Casey. My name is Sean Kerbin, and I'm an educator in the Allentown School District. On the 31st of August, I will begin my 18th year of teaching. In 2007, my
Sean,
third...
what do you get for 18 years? Do you get like a gold watch or anything, or do you get a new house or what?
I got my library taken away from me.
Okay, well, keep going. Let me hear.
Okay. In 2007, which was my third year of teaching, a program was created by Congress, and I believe that was your first year in office.
It was.
Yes, and you created the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program with the promise, go into public service, not just education, but public service, stay 10 years, we'll forgive your loans. I personally became eligible for that in 2017. I have been calling, filling out reams of paperwork, waiting, calling, paperwork since then. And I am one of the 98% who's been denied on multiple occasions for multiple things. In July, the Pennsylvania Higher Education Association agency announced it will not renew the contract as the only federal student loan servicer. Fed Loan Servicing is also the only company administering the public service loan forgiveness, and the attempt at fixing that, the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program. So, long-winded, I know, I'm a teacher, that's what I do. What, Senator Casey, is being done to help this program, not the program, but the servicer transition, and what's going to happen to those two programs. There's a lot of us waiting.
Yep. No, Sean, first of all, thanks for being an educator. Never been more important, the work that you do, and I really admire it. There's kind of two issues in one. I'll try to deal with both of them somewhat quickly. The first issue is on loan forgiveness. You're right, that program has not met anywhere near the promise that was committed to. And I think there's bipartisan, more than one administration, a number of Congresses that should take blame for that. So we're all at fault for that. So we need a remedy for that, to figure out a way to make sure that that promise is kept to people like you who were accorded the opportunity and then the promises were not met. Where you said you met your end of the bargain and the federal government didn't meet their end of the bargain. So that's one area of policy where we need a remedy. I don't think there's anything in the near term that would provide that kind of remedy, but I think you're owed that. Secondly, on the loan servicing issue, which is even broader, because you have two loans, FIA here, but then also one in New Hampshire, who are pulling out. We have been told by the current leadership of the Department of Education, they've only been there about 6-8 months, not even 8 months. We've been told that they are in the process of filling that gap. So for all kinds of loan servicing issues, that office within the Department of Education has committed to making sure that they have a vehicle to replace those two that are pulling out. It's about somewhere on the order of about 10 million Americans whose loans will be impacted by not having that loan servicer. But the Department of Education, Mr. Cordray is actually running it, who was with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, has committed to providing a substitute entity, organization to do the work that the New Hampshire and the Pennsylvania entities were going to provide. But I haven't seen yet what entity that is, whether it's been named yet, but they claim that they're going to have that in time to provide help to those who have borrowed money. That's what we've been told, so we're going to monitor that closely. But thanks for raising both parts of that issue. Okay.
Well, thank you, Senator. I think in the interest of time and the rain, I believe your question was addressed in other questions. So I think so as not to get everybody soaking wet, including you, Senator. On behalf of everyone, I want to thank you once again for being here in the Lehigh Valley, for giving such thoughtful and thorough answers to all these great questions from our residents. Thanks
so much.
Thank you
Don,
so
thank
much.
you for being a great MC.
Yeah, I didn't have much to do.
You could do this full time.
I could.
You're
Is
not
it one
being
of the
paid for
easier
tonight,
jobs?
but
You
maybe
had
you
all
should be paid.
you had all the hard work. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Cedar Crest College, for having us here.
Dr.
Thank
Meade,
you,
thank
Senator
you.
Casey.
Thanks again for having us. Thanks, everybody.
We got it in just under the rain. Wow, that was like perfect timing.
So, Don, you haven't committed to full time yet.
He thought I set you up. I said no.